Okay, so we're gonna have another mini series today. This time it's going to be Nathaniel Dusk by Don McGregor and Gene Colan from 1983 thereabouts, or 1983, 1984. Crime noir thriller set in the late 30s, early 40s. So we have number one, number two, number three, and number four. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so the premise is the story set in the 1930s. It's a pretty straightforward pulp fiction noir type detective story. There was a sequel published a year later. The plot is Detective Nathaniel Dusk is dating a woman with kids who gets killed investigating her death. He discovers a larger conspiracy that involves a mob and politicians. It's a really interesting comic that takes on a crime story homage, and it kind of pulls mainstream comics in a more mature, although not particularly explicit content. Okay, so Don McGregor broke into comics doing proofreading and editing for Marvel Comics and horror stories for Warren Publishing in the early 70s. At Marvel, McGregor worked his way up to writing Black Panther and Killraven. McGregor was sort of a pioneer of long-form storytelling in mainstream comic books. After leaving Marvel, he went to write for independent direct sales markets. So at Eclipse Comics, McGregor did Saber, Detectives Inc., which helped develop as we now think of as graphic novels. He's also written prose novels and licensed comics such as X Files, James Bond, and Lady Rawhide. Gene Colan was a long time comic book artist, so starting work in comics since the 40s. He started at Tiny Comics, which later became Marvel Comics. In the 40s, Colan's moved on to DC Comics doing war comics. He was also doing romance comics for DC in the early 60s when he started doing comics for Marvel again, but under the pseudonym Adam Austin. And there he did standout visuals for Submariner, Iron Man, and Daredevil. Did a long run on 70s Tomb of Dracula. Colan left Marvel and went to DC in 1981. I think supposedly he had a falling out with Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time. I don't think he was the only one. But at DC in the 80s, Colan did work on titles such as Night Force, Batman, I think Jim, Son of Saturn, Wonder Woman, and so also some of Colan's indie work includes Stuart the Rat with Steve Gerber from Eclipse, and Ragamuffins and Detectives Incorporated 2 with Don McGregor again. The Baxter's comics were kind of direct sales comics in the early 80s, and DC and Marvel were still experimenting with how far they could go with the direct sales comics only market. They were still doing newsstand and drugstore distribution, but that was becoming less profitable as fewer outlets at that time wanted to continue selling comics. So the draw for the consumers for these comics were you got higher production values, hence Baxter paper, more mature content sometimes. The draw for creators was usually more creative freedom and possibly co-ownership, depending on the contracts. Okay, so it's worth mentioning that this came out at a time when we already had gotten other film noir tributes and like movies and TVs that kind of get the look and feel, but not always the history of the area. Of the era. But we've had movies like Chinatown, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, Big Sleep, Long Goodbye, Mean Streets, Breathless, maybe even Blade Runner to a certain extent, even though of course it's set in the future, and a number of other films that call back to like the older films and detective novels of the past. There's also I'd say a whole subgenre of crime comics, but I don't think Dusk has much to do with that. But you go back to the 50s and 40s, stuff like Crime Doesn't Pay, Guilty, Crimes by Women, crime suspense stories. These were more anthology comics with short stories that had twist endings. I guess again, Dusk is more of a tribute to like Chandler and Hammett, and Mickey's Blaine, that sort of thing. But an argument could be made that this, as well as McGregor's Detectives Inc. And maybe comics like Ms. Tree by Max Collins and Terry Beatty, and maybe a few Japanese or European comics as well, may have kind of helped open the door for the more modern crime comics like Sin City and Criminal and 100 Bullets. Okay, so excuse me. So the story is pretty much a straight up old fashioned detective story. Nathaniel Dusk, he's a PI. His girlfriend is a mother of two who never talks about her past. She has a mysterious background. She ends up getting killed, and he has to figure out why. Was it somebody out to get him, and she was collateral damage? Or was it the other way around? And he ends up, the trail starts in, as he tries to dig into her background, he finds out about her ex-husband. There's some sort of mob connection, and this trail leads him all over the city. And like I said, there's corruption, there's mystery, there's 1930s politics, and yeah. Having said that, while the tropes are there, you get the first person narration. There's a smart ass PI. You have big goons, bad guys that show up out of nowhere, send up cops, folks, warning the lead to get off the case. McGregor does avoid presenting them in an overly hackneyed way. And, some of the other tropes you don't get so much, the femme fatale, the secretary, Venetian blinds, etc. But like I said, we do get the cynical tone. There's an attempt to ground the story, like I said before, in real history rather than just a creation of, genre cliches and things. Along with being more realistic, there's references to polio, Amos and Andy, the Depression, and it's not necessarily unique to this type of fiction or homages, but it was unique to mainstream comics at the time. And what else did I wanted to say? So So the violence is paced in a way that's kind of typical of action comics. There's maybe a little bit more blood than you would see in a code-approved comic, but McGregor's tried to give the violence and action a little weight and meaning. And what else would I would say? Nate as a character is tough, but he's vulnerable. He's not so hard-boiled that he doesn't show compassion or can't get hurt. We do get to see his sense of humor when he's interacting with others. Of course, that's not an uncommon trait among fictional PIs. We do see his determinism, and when he realizes the case is bigger than he thought. We also see tender scenes of him with his girlfriend's kids. Okay, so give you a little taste of some of the art here. It's Gene Colan, right? But what they did was they did his pencils, but then did not do the inks. So it's the coloring on top of his rough pencils. Okay. Okay, so to kind of wrap it up, the first Nathaniel Dusk miniseries is an interesting experiment. It came out at a time when superheroes had pretty much taken over Marvel and DC as best-selling comics. DC took a page from the up-and-coming indies and the direct sales market and produced a more mature comic from that explored another genre. Ironically enough, with ads for like He-Man toys, but they expanded on the content that mainstream comics could tackle. Here in Nathaniel Dust, we have a complex hero. We've got historical material, and it's blended in a competent way with dreamy, moody art, and we have a mature and engaging story. So it's a solid miniseries that's unfortunately underlooked by many of today's fans.